Hi everyone, it's Katie, and today I have a little book review for a little book. It is Witches and Wizards by Lucy Cavendish. Now this is a rather small sort of book. I think it's about 200 pages, not even, 170-ish. But it was a really enjoyable read. It's published by Rockpool Publishing and it's a beautiful hardback. The pages are really nice and there's lots of pictures throughout, which are lovely, and of course there's a little ribbon bookmark, which is a beautiful touch. I love the inside covers. They're just gorgeous and really set the theme for the book. So the premise for this book really is a bit of a look at some witches and wizards throughout history and how and where those stories and myths might intersect with reality. A good chunk of the book is also looking at the history of the witch trials throughout the world and what kind of cultural context occurred in order for those really horrific trials to take place. But what I really like about this book is it doesn't feel like an academic dry read, although I think it very easily could have been. The beauty about Lucy Cavendish is her ability to create story, and she does that really well in this book. Now, I, like a lot of people do, sometimes find Lucy Cavendish's writing to be a little bit flowery. In this book, I feel like she really kind of nailed her voice. This book is a little bit more historic, it is a little bit more factual based, so there's a bit more structure to it. And she does bring a lot of story to the table. That's kind of the point of the book. But she does it in such a way that the two, the story and the fact, really kind of meld in a beautiful way that is clear and concise, but still beautiful and emotive. Kind of the main sort of people or collections of people that we get to know throughout this book would be Merlin is a big part. There's a whole chapter on Merlin, which is beautiful and I really enjoyed. King James is another one that we learn about a bit, as well as John Dee. We also learn quite a bit about a number of people who were tried and executed during the burning times. And then towards the end of the book we get to know a bit about Aleister Crowley and Doreen Valiente. Certainly not a comprehensive history of witchcraft and wizardry throughout history or even occult history. But it is a book that really brings a personable quality to these characters. It really feels like a story in many ways, but it still feels very much based in history and fact. And you can certainly tell that Lucy has done quite a bit of research and work around the history and especially the development of this history, and how myth and story kind of spurred on and influenced history, but also how we can use story and myth to retell history in a really powerful, evocative way. The chapter on Merlin really discusses the idea of Merlin and whether Merlin was a true person or whether it is perhaps more an archetype that's been created over many number of years to kind of epitomize an idea of a person or a role in society even. She talks about how the head of the Druids was actually called the Merlin, and she also discusses where this term might have come from. So it's a really interesting story about where our idea of Merlin came from and how much of it is based in history and fact and how much of it is a story that's been created throughout time. There are a number of different stories Lucy Cavendish creates around some of the victims of the burning times, of the witch trials. But the one that really kind of jumped out to me and really struck a chord, I mean all of them were very difficult to deal with, but the one that is calling to mind now was the story of Dorothy and Sarah Good. Dorothy was 4 years old and her mother Sarah were both beggars. They were poverty stricken. And this is in a time where Salem was experiencing a very long difficult winter. And the first person to be accused of witchcraft was a Native American slave woman, and in the midst of torture she accused the Goods, Sarah and Dorothy, of participating in witchcraft of some form or another. And of course their story and experience around all of that was really difficult to read, especially given that Dorothy was only 4 or 5 at the time. I mean, it's terrible to think of the experience of being accused of such things as, you know, having sex with the devil and enjoying it, and then trying to destroy the people around you. But the idea that a 4-year-old could be involved in that is really quite troubling. Lucy does mention that Dorothy, the 4-year-old, was lucky enough to survive this ordeal after witnessing the death of many people and being tortured herself, but for the rest of her life she was basically mad. And Lucy mentions that, you know, in this modern day we would quite obviously probably recognize that what Dorothy was experiencing would be post-traumatic stress disorder, which can be a very, very debilitating disorder to experience. So it just kind of reinforces that idea that even though, you know, many people did die in those burning times, a number of people also survived, and yet the trauma remained. And I think it's from trauma that, you know, we really kind of get that maintenance of these ideas about evil and the fear that kind of lingers throughout history. And when we get to the stories about Doreen Valiente and Aleister Crowley, we start with both of them when they're very young, and we learn about them as people and what may or may not have inspired them and really kind of driven them towards witchcraft or the occult. So again, it's Lucy Cavendish really using the power of story to create a connection between us and these characters, these people that did exist. Especially Crowley often feels so larger than life and strange and obscure that you can't really, at least I sometimes struggle to even imagine that he was real. He seems so larger than life, he seems like a mythological character. Whereas when we start to get to know him as a young boy and kind of his background, and even how and why he changed his name, I think it adds that personable connection that makes us start to kind of get an idea of who this person may or may not have been. So it doesn't really just feel like a chronological detail of what these people did. It feels much more like an exploration of what drove these people, what inspired these people, and also how they added to the overall story of witchcraft, wizardry, and the occult that we know today. A nice little touch by Lucy Cavendish is the practical magic sections throughout the book, which are kind of distinguished in these grey boxes. And basically they kind of offer little rituals or spells that you can do that kind of relate to the story that she's telling in that part of the book. There's a really quite beautiful little invocation almost for the archetype or the being of Merlin, which I thought was really sweet, and another way to kind of really bring those stories of these characters, these people, into our own experience as well. And I really liked that addition to the book. So overall, I really, really enjoyed Witches and Wizards by Lucy Cavendish. I found it easy to read, and yet it wasn't simplistic. It was a beautiful blending of history and fact with storytelling that made the whole process of revisiting these historical experiences or situations or events really enjoyable. I felt curious and excited reading this book. It didn't feel overwhelming or academic or dry, and yet I was learning about different situations and events and people throughout history. It was a really beautiful experience reading this book. So that's my little review of this wonderful little book. I hope you enjoyed. Please ask any questions or leave any comments below and I'll get back to you. And until next time guys, much love. Bye.